Welcome to In the Know with Bloom. Today we've got a special guest. We've got Professor Tim Noakes, who is part of the Division of Exercise Science and Sports Medicine at the University of Cape Town. He's also run more than 70 marathons and ultramarathons and is the author of several books on exercise and diet. And today we're talking about his latest one, The Real Meal Revolution. Tim Noakes, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks Matthew.
So welcome to In the Noakes. We're going to be bantering about Banting, and that's the diet that you talk about in this book. So just for people that don't know, because I mean it's taken over South Africa and everyone knows about Banting, but those who are living under a rock, what is Banting diet?
So William Banting was an undertaker in Britain. He had the contract to bury all the kings and queens, and unfortunately he was very wealthy, but he was fat and he had major problems because of his obesity. But because he was wealthy, he could seek out all sorts of advice. So every single doctor in London who had ever expressed any expertise in obesity control, he was consulted by Banting, and Banting did everything he was told to do religiously, including buying a rowing boat and rowing up and down the Thames for hours on end. And he said it made me very strong, but I just got hungry and I didn't lose a kilogram. Eventually he met Dr. Harvey, who had just come from France and heard a lecture where the famous physiologist Claude Bernard said, I think obesity's got something to do with carbohydrates. They didn't know. And so he decided to put Banting on a low carbohydrate diet. And Banting immediately lost all his weight. And he described it in a book called Letter on Corpulence, a letter to the general public. And he self-published it. He tried to get the Lancet and other medical journals to publish it. They said, you're a layperson, you don't know anything. So he wrote the book, became very popular, and that was the first diet. That is the original diet.
What year was that?
Diet, that was 1862. Every single diet thereafter is a fad diet, including this diet that we currently encourage to eat, the so-called prudent, heart-healthy, low-fat diet. That is a fad diet. And of course, all the people who promote that diet tell us that the Banting diet is a fad diet. Nuh-uh, it's been around since 1862.
Okay. Now that's interesting. So, if we're not eating carbs, then I'm assuming we're eating more fats, right?
Correct.
But isn't that the problem? Isn't fats demonized?
Well, it never was, because humans are designed to eat fat, and we only survived for 2 million years, and we got these big brains because our major source of energy was fat. The problem happened was we were such skilled hunters that we killed out the really big animals like the elephants and the mammoths and the really fat animals, because if you're not eating carbohydrate, it's very difficult to get enough fat. See, humans can only eat about 35% of their total calories from protein, otherwise you get sick. So the other 65% has to come from fat or from fat and carbohydrate. So the Neanderthals were able to eat 65% of their diet from fat because they were killing mammoths. But eventually the mammoths and elephants were killed out, and then all of a sudden they had a gap. They couldn't eat any more protein and they had to find carbohydrate, but there was none and they were wiped out.
Oh, wow.
So it seems to me that when humans had wiped out all the fat animals, we then turned to agriculture. That was 18,000 years ago, and that caused the problem because now we were starting to eat a high carbohydrate diet for which our biology is simply not established. We're not designed to eat a high carbohydrate diet. So the next thing that's happened in 1977, the United States government decides that they're going to make cereals and grains the dominant food stuff across the globe. And so they make it firstly easy for Americans to grow wheat and rice, and not rice, but wheat and maize and soy. And they produce on an industrial scale. And then they just swamp the world with this. And then at the same time, they make sure that the scientists come up and say, well, eating a grain-based diet is healthy, which is not. It's never been shown to be so. And that was the beginning of the end for our health and the growth of the obesity and diabetes epidemics.
Yeah, so that is the problem, because they started this whole monocropping of wheat and legumes and all these things, and now it's become a big industry. So now this industry is pumping money to bring out all this information. Now recently, I did a podcast about coconut oil, and how the American Heart Association has said that coconut oil is actually bad for us because it's got saturated fats. But what's going on there?
Well, what's driving that is the vegetable oil industry. The vegetable oil industry, and driven by Unilever and a few other companies. And you see, we didn't eat any so-called vegetables because they're seed oils. We ate none of them until 1920 or so, when the technique was developed to extract the oils and hydrogenate them, and so that you could make fake butter, in other words, margarine. And they were highly toxic because they contained trans fats and high omega-6 fatty acid content. And we've known since 1970 that they're highly toxic. And they've slowly reduced the consumption of trans fats particularly. But we don't even know what the content of the ones that are being made, the hydrogenated fats that are currently being marketed. We have no idea. But yet we know that coconut oil is safe. So what does the American Heart Association come up with? They come up with, they falsify the information, they cherry pick the data, and they make the argument that polyunsaturated fats are healthy from vegetables, and there's absolutely no evidence. All the evidence is contrary to that. So this industry is misleading us, and the consequences are that people must demand the truth. Yeah. That's why we wrote that book. Okay. Because that tells us the truth.
Yeah. And with this whole polyunsaturated fats, the American Heart Association is saying that saturated fats, there's a link between saturated fats and cholesterol, and how that is causing heart disease. But I just want to clarify that, because it's definitely not what we've been told. So what is saturated fats doing for our cholesterol, and is there a link between heart disease? What's the real story?
Well, that is the great distortion that begins in 1953, when Ansel Keys decides that saturated fat causes heart disease. He didn't even know what saturated fat. He didn't understand that when you eat fat, you eat saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fats. And he just assumed that all animal fat was saturated fat, which is not. And so they got the idea that if you eat animal sources of fat, you're going to get saturated fat. That's nonsense. There's more saturated fat in avocado and oil and olive oil than there is in things like bacon. But you never told that, you see, because everyone believes that animals produce saturated fat. It's not. You've always got all three. So you need to look at the constitution of the different fats. So he came along with this idea that saturated fat caused cholesterol to rise, and then that causes heart disease. Well, unfortunately, 50 years later, we know it's completely wrong. There was never any evidence for that. And in my trial, I had two of the world authorities, Nina Teicholz and Zoe Harcom, and they came and presented their work. And Zoe Harcom particularly looked at all the evidence that was available in the 1970s when these guidelines were drawn up. There was not one iota of evidence that saturated fat was bad for you, or that cholesterol causes heart disease. It's completely been manufactured, and particularly the cholesterol theory, because we have these drugs, statins, which lower cholesterol. And as long as you believe that cholesterol causes heart disease, then it's great, because lower cholesterol will not have only heart disease. The only problem is statin drugs are probably the most ineffective drugs that have ever been designed. They help between 1 and 2 people in 100. So it means that between 49 and 99 people who take them are not helped. And you never told that. We told that they're life-saving drugs, which is, nothing could be further from the truth. And they generate about $40 billion a year from income. And that is how criminal this whole story is. Yeah,
and that's what I like about talking about these things, because the more we talk about it, the more we realize what the real underlying story is, and it makes a lot more sense when you start to speak like that. So let's just get a clarification about the difference between saturated, unsaturated and polyunsaturated fats.
So saturated fats have a carbon backbone, all of the fats do, and all the bonds between the carbons are saturated. There are no double bonds. When you introduce double bonds, you start to twitch the structure, and that allows it to become more fluid and become an oil, but it's highly unstable, and it can be oxidized. And when it becomes oxidized, it's rancid and it's not healthy for you. So you do need some polyunsaturated fats. They are essential. There are two, linoleic acid and linolenic acid, which are essential. Our bodies don't produce them. And so we have to have them. The problem was that we got it all wrong because we said, well, animals produce saturated fat, etc. So if you're eating animals, you're eating saturated fat, which is nonsensical. When you're eating vegetable oils, you're eating mainly omega-6 fatty acids, which are not healthy. You only need a certain amount. And when you fill your body with omega-6 fatty acids, it changes the membranes of the cells, and they respond differently. And there's very good evidence that it doesn't protect against heart disease, and that they may well promote cancer even. And that evidence goes back till the 1960s, but it's completely suppressed because industry managed to suppress all that information. And what industry does is they fund the researchers who then draw up the dietary guidelines.
Yes.
And what Nina Teichelt was able to show is that they ignore any evidence on low carbohydrate benefits.
Wow.
Because that conflicts with the funders. And Harvard University is the worst. Everyone would think anything that comes out of Harvard's fantastic. They've been funded firstly by the sugar industry, and secondly by the vegetable oil industry. And for 50 years they've been producing this nonsensical research suggesting that cereals and grains are healthy. But when you do real studies, which are called randomized control trials, where you take people and you randomize them to two different groups, and you feed the one group cereals and grains and the other standard food, there's no benefit from eating cereals and grains.
Yeah.
But we ignore that. And that's a very important point, that the only evidence we accept is randomized controlled trials. And all of them show no linkage between saturated fat or low-fat diets. So no linkage between low-fat diets and health. In fact, they show low-fat diets are very likely to be unhealthy for you.
Okay.
But we just ignore it. So I debated a guy called Jacques Rousseau, who was head of the Women's Health Initiative, which spent $700 million trying to prove that the low-fat diet works. He proved it doesn't work. They showed that it made diabetes worse and people with heart disease got worse. So when he presents data, he never talks about the Women's Health Initiative because it disproves it at the highest level. He goes and looks at the secondary evidence, which is that populations have changed and heart disease rates have gone down. So they claim it's because they're eating better and they're not eating so much saturated fat. But that's not the evidence we want. We want the evidence from randomized controlled trials. And they clearly show there's no evidence whatsoever that a low-fat diet helps you to be healthier.
And there's also a problem because we always, with diets, we have these labels, and then the labels have certain guidelines, and as long as you meet those guidelines, it's fine. So when they say a high-fat diet, they may be saying high fat, but then they're not including the good fats. They're including all the bad fats, and then because they're including those bad fats, which causes oxidation in the body, and that causes heart diseases, then they come out with a study, and it just on the news, on the headlines, high-fat diet's not good, and that's the problem. Is people don't go into the study and to see what the details are.
Yeah, sure.
Because I think it's a very important thing to realize that it's the type of fats, just like it's the type of proteins, just like it's the type of carbohydrates. It's all the same. You have to have quality ingredients, and in the Banting, you promote a whole foods diet.
So where do you think the average South African gets their saturated fat from? Is it from animals? No. It's from the hardening or the shortening that is used to make cakes and pizza and biscuits. That's where the saturated fat's coming in. And of course, it's coming in with a whole bunch of carbohydrates and sugar, and it's the wrong type because it's a vegetable oil that's been hardened to make it look like butter. If they were using butter, then those things would be somewhat healthier. South Africans are not getting their saturated fat from eating animals. They're getting it from eating vegetable oils that have been hydrogenated and used as shortening in all those baked foods. Baked foods is where you get your saturated fat. But no one ever says that. So we're saying quite correctly, get your saturated fat from the animals or from plants like avocados or coconuts in the natural state, not the one that's been hydrogenated by industry.
Yeah. And then let's talk about cholesterol as well, because that's another big thing. Recently we've found that cholesterol is actually good for us. So explain a little bit about what cholesterol actually does.
Well, it does everything. Without the difference between plants and humans are cholesterol, because cholesterol now gives you a stable membrane structures. It's used for most of your hormones, the female and male hormones, and it's built for bile that you can absorb nutrients. You can't digest nutrients unless you have bile, and so those are some of the key factors. But it's part of your brain. It's 25% of your brain is cholesterol. It coats the nerves so that the nerves can send their messages. And it's involved in immune function. So when you get an infection, one of the key things is cholesterol rises to try and knock off the infecting bacteria and viruses. So it's absolutely crucial. Do you think that your liver produces a gram of cholesterol every day because it wants to kill you? No. It produces a gram of cholesterol a day because your body can't do that. It wants to
save you.
It wants to save you. And unfortunately, the model that cholesterol is not the cause of heart disease. It's carbohydrates in people like myself who are diabetic or pre-diabetic and we're insulin resistant. We're the ones who get heart disease. And it's carbohydrate driven. It's not driven by fats.
But what exactly happens, or how does the carbohydrates block our arteries to cause our heart disease?
Okay, so what happens is if you're insulin resistant like myself, you can't metabolize carbohydrate normally.
Okay.
So if you give me carbohydrate, I've got two choices. I either store it as carbohydrate, I store it as fat, or I burn it as a fuel. And what happens is you'll immediately burn it. So people who take carbohydrates only burn carbohydrates, and then they just store the fat. So you store the fat and you burn the carbohydrates, and then 3 hours later you eat more carbohydrates. So you get progressively fatter because you're not actually using your fat stores. As soon as you cut carbohydrates, then you can burn the fat, because that's what you do. You eat the fat, it's stored in your fat cells, and then you utilize it. And that's the way we're designed to be. So now, to answer your question, so why do you get heart disease if you're eating carbohydrates? If we're insulin resistant like myself, we eat carbohydrates, it can't go into our muscles, we don't burn it as effectively as we could, and we store it as fat in the liver, and that makes us more insulin resistant. So we have to secrete more insulin the next time we take in carbohydrate. We get more of a fatty liver. And as the liver becomes fat, it starts to produce the wrong type of cholesterol. And those are the small dense LDL particles. And that's the combination of high glucose, these small dense LDL particles, and inflammation. That's what damages the arteries.
Okay.
How do we know that? Diabetic patients have the worst arteries. They have complete arterial obstruction. That is the disease.
Wow.
And if you want to predict who's going to get a heart attack, it's the diabetics. Who's going to get blindness because of arterial damage? It's the diabetics. Who's going to get cancer? It's the diabetics. Diabetes and this insulin resistance is a driver of chronic ill health. And as soon as we get those people onto a high-fat diet, they start to get better and start to heal.
So let's just explain also the HDL and the LDL, because LDL is bad, but only when it, like you said, in the small particles. When we actually eat saturated fats, it becomes a bigger particle. So just explain HDL.
So the idea that there's bad and good cholesterol is utter rubbish. I mean, how can one cholesterol, a chemical, be good or bad? Someone drew an analogy. See, when the LDL takes cholesterol to the arteries and the rest of the body, and the HDL is meant to bring it back, it's like an ambulance. You see, an ambulance heading out to the injured patient is a bad ambulance. But once it's got the guy on board, it suddenly becomes a good ambulance. That's the stupidity of the analogy. But it's not cholesterol, because cholesterol does not exist in your bloodstream as such. it exists in a lipoprotein. We've got proteins in the lining, because otherwise it's not water soluble. So you've got lipoproteins, and it's the lipoproteins that are the problem. And the lipoproteins that are the problem is the small, dense LDL particles. And once you eat fat, as you said, they become bigger, and then they become non-toxic. The small ones can be oxidized, and then they damage arteries, or they can get into damaged arteries. But the artery has to be damaged first by inflammation. And that's part of the high carbohydrate diet, plus the insulin and plus the glucose. That's what causes the arteries to become really damaged. And then the cholesterol comes along and tries to fix it up, but actually makes it worse often.
So now we're saying high cholesterol is actually good. But what about those people that want to start a Banting diet, but they're taking statin drugs and blood pressure pills? What do we do for that?
That's great, because they're taking statin drugs. We'll talk about that, but they've got high blood pressure because of the high carbohydrate diet, and people are insulin resistant. You see, the underlying disease is insulin resistance.
Yes.
And 60% or 70% of South Africans are insulin resistant.
Wow.
And if you eat a high carbohydrate diet, then you get obesity, diabetes, gout, hypertension, cancer, and dementia. Probably those are the 6 that are linked. But the underlying condition is the same. It's insulin resistance. So those are all the same disease. They're not different diseases. But in medicine, we treat them as different diseases, and we've got these silos. So if you've got hypertension, you go and see the hypertension silo. But he doesn't ask you what you eat, or she doesn't ask you what you eat. But if sugar is driving the hypertension, and so if you cut the sugar and the carbohydrates, you can reverse the hypertension in majority of patients.
Okay. And
then you see they call it idiopathic. That we don't know what causes hypertension. Hold it. Hypertension didn't exist until we started eating this diet. So it has to be something in the diet. And we've shown in our community studies where when you get poorer communities in Cape Town stop eating sugar, blood pressure drops dramatically.
Oh, really?
So it's the sugar that's driving the hypertension in insulin resistance. So firstly, and the diabetes is reversible, we now know, if you eat a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. So we know we can't reverse the insulin resistance. It's always there, but the consequences are caused by the high carbohydrate diet. So if you cut the carbohydrates, you don't need the medicines. So you asked, a patient goes on this diet, well, they will stop taking their hypertensive medication. Their cholesterol may go up or go down, but it's irrelevant because their glucose is coming down, the insulin's coming down, and the LDL particles are getting bigger. So everything that's predicting they should have a heart attack is getting better on a high-fat diet. So that's great. So why would they need medication? They only need medication if you believe in this pharmacological model of disease, which is that you get sick because the reason you have a heart attack is because you're missing a statin in your bloodstream or cholesterol-lowering drug. Nonsense. It's because you're eating too much carbohydrate and you're insulin resistant. But the problem for us to shift the current mindset away from using drugs to treat disease and saying it's actually all dietary related, that's never going to happen.
Yeah. Because
industry is too powerful. And all we can do is tell patients, these are the facts. If you take that statin drug, 1 in 100 is going to benefit. If you go on this diet, we can change all your risk factors, and surely that's going to do better for you because it costs you nothing. There's no risk involved because you've been not taking the medication. And so the only thing we can do is to get the public to change and to demand that medicine will change.
Yeah, these kind of things become a lifestyle. It's not diets. And if it's something that benefits you, it becomes a lifestyle because you get addicted to the benefits and you realize how much power you have in your own hands. And that's what I love about real diets like the Banting and those kind of things. You said insulin resistant. How do people know if they're insulin resistant?
That's a brilliant question because that's the one thing you want to know. Yeah. And everyone knows their cholesterol. And I can tell you can come into me and show me your cholesterol results and you can have a value of 2 or a value of 13. It means absolutely nothing to me as a clinician who understands what these things mean. You can be dropped there the next second with a cholesterol of 2 and you can live a healthy life with a cholesterol of 13. No one. There have been 19 studies trying to see if your cholesterol is high or low, does that predict the extent of disease in your coronary arteries? And the answer is not one study has shown any relationship.
Wow.
Because it's not related. There are other factors. So measuring cholesterol is a complete, utter waste of time. If I had one thing to measure, it would be your insulin when you wake up in the morning, and that tells us how insulin resistant you are. If it's above 5, you're in trouble. That means you're insulin resistant. Okay, so we can't measure that, but we can measure something else, the glycated hemoglobin. It's called HbA1c. And I'm going to repeat that, the HbA1c. So what happens in your insulin resistance, initially you oversecrete insulin. That keeps your glucose normal all day, even if you're eating carbs. However, eventually the insulin doesn't act properly, and then your glucose is elevated during the day. And as soon as your glucose becomes elevated, it binds to the proteins in the body, and the one in the bloodstream that we can measure is hemoglobin. So the glucose binds to the hemoglobin, and it changes the protein. And we can measure how much binding there is as a percentage of the total hemoglobin in your bloodstream. And once it goes above 5.5%, so you'd have an HbA1c greater than 5.5%, you're essentially pre-diabetic. And if you continue to eat that way for 10 years, your value will be 6.1%. Another 5 years, it'll be 6.5%, and we'll make a diagnosis of diabetes. But if we take cutoff as 5.5 and say, okay, if you're below 5.5, your diet's fine, carry on. As the minute it goes above 5.5, we say, okay, too much carbs, cut the carbs, we get it back below 5.5. You will never develop diabetes. It's simple, and we don't do it. So we focus on measuring cholesterol because there's a treatment, a drug. There's no treatment for HbA1c, the treatment is a diet. So no one's going to push the HbA1c.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But you said you insulin resistant, but it seems like you can change the percentage of your
A1C, that's
A1C with your diet. So how come you're insulin resistant? Or is that...
Okay, so good. So I've been insulin resistant all my life. My father died of diabetes. That put me at a 10-fold greater risk of developing diabetes, which I didn't know. No one ever told me that. You know, we were told, well, diabetes is just going to happen. You get obese, and you just, that's the consequence. No. Insulin resistance causes the obesity. Insulin resistance causes the heart disease. Insulin resistance causes everything. And if you're born with it, there's only one solution. You've just got to eat few carbohydrates. So my body is insulin resistant. It just doesn't work on carbohydrates. The insulin doesn't act as it should. And I can never change that. What I can do is reduce the input of the carbohydrates, and that will drop my HbA1c dramatically.
I see.
So that's how we do it. That's how we treat type 2 diabetes now, is we put people on a 25% carbohydrate diet. And you can drop the HbA1c in many people to within the normal range. For many people, they will need some medication, but not insulin. You do not need insulin if you're type 2 diabetic and you're eating this diet. You never need to use insulin again.
So how did you survive on such a high carbohydrate diet when you were doing marathons and things like that?
Well, the answer is I wasn't surviving. I was getting fatter, and my running was getting worse and worse and worse. And I was falling asleep, and I was snoring, and everything was wrong. And I just thought that's aging, because that's what I was told. You know, you must expect to get old. As you get old, you must get sick, because that's what my profession taught me. And only by chance did I discover that was all wrong, and then change onto the diet. No, you know, if only I had eaten this diet all my life, I would never have got type 2 diabetes, and I would have been running ultra marathons for another 10 or 15 years. My great friend Bruce Fordyce, who's also insulin resistant, who I put on a high carbohydrate diet, and who won the Comrades Marathon 9 times on that high carbohydrate diet.
Wow. And
we all thought it was helping him. He said to me, you know, Tim, because he converted, he said, you know, if I'd eaten this diet when I was younger, maybe I would have won more than 9 Comrades.
That's interesting. And the biggest problem that I have with high fat, carbohydrate diets is not all those problems, like you say, is a problem. But for me specifically, being hungry all the time is terrible, because hunger is a powerful force. And when you're hungry all the time, that's pretty much where you're focusing your energies.
Exactly.
So with a high fat diet, it's nice because your body is saturated with the fats, so to speak, and you're able to carry on for 4 to 6 hours without even thinking about food.
Yeah. No, exactly, and that's what people just won't grasp. The dietitians just don't get it. That if you're going to eat carbohydrates, you're going to be hungry all the time, and you're focusing on food. So what do they say? Well, you must eat 6 meals a day, which is great because you just eat more calories and you get fatter and you become more insulin resistant. And as soon as you eat this high-fat diet, you have a totally different relationship with food, which you described. Food no longer runs your life. I last ate breakfast yesterday morning. That was I've snacked since then, but I haven't had a proper meal since breakfast yesterday morning. It's now 24 hours. If I get a meal tonight, that's fine. That's all I need.
That's also the nice thing is sometimes you just can't get to a meal, and if you can't get to a meal when you're in ketosis, it's fine. It's okay. You can carry on. But it seems like a life or death situation when you on a high carbohydrate diet and you need to get your food.
Yeah, and that's the addiction. That's the addiction of carbohydrates. People don't understand. It's the sugar and carbohydrate addiction.
But there's one thing that I'm conflicted with, and that's fruits, because I very much am wanting to be part of nature. I believe nature is there to help us. But I don't know where fruits sit in our diet, because obviously fruits are high in fructose, high in carbohydrates. So where does it fit in our diet?
Well, what's natural about the current fruits that we eat? What's natural about them? I mean, I'll ask the question.
Well, actually not.
There's completely
nothing.
Unnatural. They're completely bred to be high in sweetness so that you become addicted to them.
Because of the way they mass produce.
Yeah, and the way they're hybridized. And they haven't been genetically modified, but they've been hybridized to make sure that they've got more calories and more sugar and more sweetness.
Okay.
And so they're completely unnatural. If you were around 10,000 years ago, by the way, vegetables only were discovered 10,000 years ago, so they've only been in the chain for a short time, and fruit's probably pretty much the same. But the fruit was hard, it was small, it was bitter. It's nothing like the characteristics today.
Interesting.
So this is just more addiction.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's talk about quality of foods. First, I want to talk about dairy because, like I said to you before, before I knew about the Banting, I had a lot of misconceptions that it's all you can eat meat, it's all you can eat dairy, full fat, all those kind of things. But when I read your book, it states perfectly clear you shouldn't be eating too much protein. We know that's a bad thing, we can get into that. And it says you can delve into dairy, but only if you can handle it. Because a lot of people, they have allergic reactions to it, and that can cause a lot of inflammation and problems. Let's talk about dairy first. So
I think you've pretty well covered it.
Okay.
If you can,
so
if you
just
can
have
cope with it, it's a really good source of fats, vitamins. But you must eat full cream, unpasteurized if you can get unpasteurized, because as soon as you pasteurize it, you destroy slightly the value.
Yeah.
And to drink skim milk or 2% is just a waste of time. All that they've been stripped out, they've stripped out the nutrients that you really need.
Yeah, and adding the sugars to make it taste good.
Yeah, exactly. And then a lot of people do find they struggle to lose weight if they have much dairy. And I don't know why it is, but there are a lot of people who find that as soon as they cut dairy, they lose weight again.
Yeah, then I think that's the inflammation, because it's the body's allergic response. Okay, then let's talk about too much protein, because we all know that's actually not a good thing. I only eat about 100 grams of meat a day, and that's already, that's a little bit too much, but what problems occur?
Humans can't. We have a liver that's designed only to cope with about 2 grams per kilogram. So that's about 35% of your total calories. If you eat more than that, you can't detoxify the proteins and you die. If you eat like that for a couple of months, you will die.
Yeah.
So that's why we restrict the amount of protein. There's a range between about 0.5 and 2%. 0.5, gram per kilogram and 2 grams per kilogram. which seems to be right for most people. You simply can't survive beyond that. You will get sick. And most people will tell you that. They'll develop diarrhea immediately within a few days.
Yeah.
And then they'll start to feel sick. It's a well-described phenomenon. People getting lost in the desert, and they're living on rabbits, they die.
Wow.
Because there's not enough fat there.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the misconception about Banting, because a lot of the complaints are not enough fiber, but you specifically state that you should be eating a lot of calories are coming from vegetables and dark leafy green vegetables, and so
that's correct. There's more fiber in that diet than there is in the conventional diet, but the dietitians will never tell you that. There's also more nutrients in this diet than in the conventional diet. Excuse me, the conventional diet is nutrient poor. That's why cereals contain extra nutrients, because they worked out if you were to eat cereals for breakfast on the traditional so-called healthy low-fat diet, you wouldn't be getting enough nutrients. So they had to put them in so that the dietary advice would be sufficient to cover your nutrient requirements. That's how bad it is. Eat real foods and you'll get all the nutrients you need.
Yeah. And then just one problem I had was I think there should be more emphasis on quality of meats and dairy products. From my personal experience, from environmental perspective and also a health perspective, because the industrialization of meat is terrible. Feedlot animals are destroying the planet, and they're destroying our health. And do you want to speak a little bit about...
Yeah, well, conversely, if you put them onto grass, they will save the planet, because they will take the CO2 out of the air and stick it in the soil.
Yes.
And we can't survive without that. Yeah. Monoculture is killing the earth as well, because it's destroying the topsoil. And once the topsoil's gone, humanity's gone.
Yeah.
So the idea that you can eat soy and that's saving the earth planet's nonsense.
Yeah.
Eating grass-fed meat is what's going to save the planet.
Amen.
So we have to eat grass-fed animals.
Yeah, and that's why I also just want to state that it matters about the amount of protein that we eat. So it's not like everyone's going to be pounding on grass-fed meat. I think there was a stat that if you eat 1 pound of meat today, you're killing about 0.7 animals throughout the year.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
Compared to the amount of animals that get killed on a monocrop because of the way they use the tractors to kill all the insects and microorganisms in the soil. And
there were animals on that land which have all gone. They've all disappeared. It's completely sterile.
Yeah.
The monoculture is completely sterile, including, as you said, the bacteria in the soil.
So there's a lot to get into, but there was a few questions from people on the Facebook groups that I just wanted to ask. People that are struggling with stubborn fat.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that struggle with the last 5 kilograms or so when on the Banting diet. What could that be?
Okay, so that they're still eating more calories than they need, and probably they're over-secreting insulin, so they need to perhaps start intermittent fasting. I think that's the way to go, to get down to eating infrequently, like once a day. But on the other hand, it's probably completely healthy for you to have that extra little bit of fat. What's dangerous to be eating carbs and spiking your insulin all the time. That's what's really, and if you're not eating carbohydrates, then you're not spiking insulin. So, I've just seen a lady this morning she's 160 kilos and she's absolutely healthy. I mean, it's astonishing. She's insulin resistant, but she has no evidence for diabetes. So if you can be 160 kilograms and look healthy, that extra 2 or 3 kilos may be completely okay. You want to look aesthetically, you want to look different.
Yes.
But if you want to look aesthetically different, you may have to restrict your fat intake particularly. Okay. And fasting is probably the best way to do that. But I'm not sure that that's the healthiest way, because you may be cutting your calories and the diet may be nutrient poor as a result. So you just have to decide. And not everyone's going to look like a model. And we just have to accept that.
Yeah. We also got to play around and see what works.
precisely.
There was another one, insomnia and messed up menstrual cycles.
Yeah.
So I have heard about complaints when on a very low carb diet that insomnia occurs. Because we do use a little bit of glycogen, our brain uses glycogen for sleeping. Is there a problem with too low of a glycogen store, or?
No, that's a good question. I think it's an individual response because it's certainly not what people tell me. People generally find they sleep much better on this diet. So it would be an individual response. And if that is the case, see what happens. Eat a bit more carbohydrate and see what happens.
Yeah.
We're all so different. There may be some people who definitely need a bit more carbohydrate. And that's no problem. But for the majority, they just sleep less and sleep better as a consequence.
Yeah, because healthy people are actually supposed to.
Yeah.
They don't need as much sleep.
So, I mean, that I've certainly noticed. And I find it much easier to travel now on this diet. So that would be the point there. But talking about menstruation, by and large, menstruation is due to too little fat in the diet. Sorry, abnormalities in menstruation. And it's really funny because the one Facebook page in Cape Town, the 7-day Banting meal plan, which has now 800,000 members.
Wow.
Do you know what they report as the biggest effect, complication is pregnancy.
Pregnancy. Okay, yeah.
Everyone's fast falling pregnant when they start eating this diet because they become regular. Their fertility rates go up, and they're all calling them Tim babies, and they're blaming me though.
No, but that is fertility is the key. What you call marker.
It's a key marker of your
health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely
if you're not fertile, there's something wrong.
Precisely, correct.
Because evolutionary speaking, we need to procreate.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And the number of people who I know who've been told you will never have a child again, and within 3 months on the start they fall pregnant, and it's a miracle.
Yeah.
And tragically, the obstetricians don't yet understand that. Or if they do, they don't push it hard enough on their patients.
Yeah.
Why not? Because they do IV fertilization and all that stuff, which is hell of an expensive.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't really be allowed to go through that unless you've changed your diet and eat a high-fat diet. If the high-fat diet doesn't work, fine, go for it. But the high-fat diet's going to be so effective in so many people, they won't need to go through that fertilization program.
Then I think that's about it. It's just, is there any complications with women that fast too much? Because I think there is a bit of problems when it comes to fasting with women specifically.
There's the problem of anorexia and orthorexia. There's no question about that. Generally, I think anorexia is driven by high carbohydrate diets because people are always hungry, and so that they develop all these other methods of making sure that they don't feel hungry. And I think that they benefit hugely from a high-fat diet because then they're not hungry and they can control their body weight much more effectively. But I can see that there may well be people who go on this diet, they lose weight, but they don't quite get as lean as they want to be, as you mentioned earlier. And they could start fasting and cut their calories, which is not ideal. So I think that you should eat to hunger and don't try to force your hunger too low. And then you'll be getting the right diet. We do need a certain number of calories to get in enough nutrients to be healthy. And if you go below that, then it could be a problem in the long term. And I think people have to realize that, I'm 68 now, you eat for 80 and 90 because that's when things start falling apart. And you don't want them to fall apart. And I'm absolutely convinced that the better your nutrition for the longer period, the healthier you're going to be at 80 or 90.
No, that's good. Thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
I just want to tell all the listeners that if you are Banting, read the book, understand what is going on, because high fats does not just mean high fats and you can go all crazy, all out. It's nutrient density, it's whole foods, it's quality, all those good stuff, and that's what makes the Banting successful. So thank you, Professor.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Lovely to chat to you. Thanks, Matthew.
All right.
In the know.